All right, welcome back, everyone. Some big stories to go into. There's actually an interesting shift taking place now. And get this, folks, there are blue states, Colorado and New York, that are conceding on the vaccines and on some of the mandates. In Colorado now, the governor there has given up. They've said that pretty much the pandemic's over. Things are done. And they're saying if you want to get vaccinated, even though they're still recommending it, they're saying it's your personal choice. In New York State as well, the governor, again, after making these new mandates for masks indoors, has conceded as well, saying that she will not even try to enforce them in some of the counties that are pushing back. This says a lot, I think, about the way things are going. I talk a lot about trajectory and looking at patterns. It looks like, folks, that frankly, the data is not supporting the level of panic around Omicron, the level of pushback and the constitutional, I'd say, lack of constitutional backing they realize they're having for some of these policies is looking like it's pushing back strong enough now to where they're having trouble with it. And as uh, Tumblr's notes, they aren't conceding; they just want to get reelected. That's also a big possibility because the midterm elections are right around the corner. They're finding these policies are very unpopular. Also, folks, the Salvation Army, after you might remember, telling people they need to apologize for their wokeness, or sorry, for their whiteness, when it was criticizing both white people and Christians. The Salvation Army looks like it's now struggling, folks, and this whole get woke, go broke slogan seems to apply to the Salvation Army. I'll talk about what's happening with them. Also, some interesting updates from different parts of Africa because, folks, right now, the South African medical chief is actually criticizing Western countries, the UK and others, of their extreme, what he calls unreasonable level of panic they're having over the Omicron variant. And it's interesting to see as well that Africa, Kenya, they're rolling back some of these policies. Things are changing there as well. And they seem to be like, why is the West acting so crazy? Which is an interesting update. I'll be explaining this a lot of us to go into, folks. That said, it's a pleasure seeing you all here. Hey, James, California said Josh TV is. I appreciate it. Actually, on that note, we are on Roku. Some of you have mentioned Rumble. Was it Rumble? We are on a lot of different channels as well, actually. So if you, of course, can't access it on here on YouTube, you can check out our other channels as well. Folks, Epic TV and YouTube are our main ones. And those of you watching Epic TV, thanks for being here. We've also started up a new YouTube channel to help get away from the censorship here on this one. That is Crossroads Highlights. In fact, we may start broadcasting the live soon on Crossroads Highlights because, again, it's uncensored. It's not demonetized yet, at least. And so we can actually kind of get things rolling again there. So I'll keep you updated on that. In the meantime, folks, let's jump into the first stories for the night. First off, let's talk about blue states conceding on the virus. Because, folks, there's an interesting pattern again we're seeing here. The Colorado governor, Jared Polis, a Democrat, has declared that the COVID-19 virus emergency is over, done, no more. While he's backing off the emergency protocol, he's also saying he will not mandate masks, meaning he's conceding on all possible grounds, it seems. He is still encouraging people to get vaccinated, right? He's still saying they should because he pulled them by his belief, but he's saying it's people's own choices going forward, whether they choose to or not. Epic Times reports that he said, quote, "I still encourage everybody who hasn't been vaccinated to get protected. And for those who are, make sure to get that booster after 6 months. The data shows," he says, "it's important and very likely even more so with this Omicron variant." Yet he added, "The emergency is over. You don't tell people to wear a jacket when they go out in winter and force them to wear it. If they get frostbite, it's their own darn fault." Now, again, he's standing by his position where he does believe, it seems, that the masks and the vaccines are necessary, but he's not forcing it on people. That's where he's at right now. Now, data in Colorado shows that cases have been dropping. There are currently around 1,329 people in the hospital with the virus. This is down from around 230 over the past week, meaning cases are already dropping. And interestingly, this is not a unique case. Colorado dropping the emergency declaration altogether, because in New York we actually see a shift as well. interestingly, because New York tends to kind of lead the country on policy. Folks, in New York, while it's not as final, I'd say, again, it's not the ending of the whole thing like Colorado is doing. It's not as big as what Colorado is doing in terms of ending the emergency status, but the New York governor, the new one, Kathy Hochul, told reporters that her administration will not try to make New York counties enforce her new mask mandates, which started on December 13. Officials in many counties in New York had previously said that they would refuse to enforce the mandates. Now, this is important on a few different areas. Both of these Democrat governors are in very blue states. Colorado is very blue. New York is, of course, very blue, as many people know. Blue states with some counties that are very red, as in blue is in Democrat, red is in conservative or Republican, they're called these days. It's interesting now that this shift is taking place on the Democrat side, because the Democrats tend to march in lockstep, right? They tend to be more unified in things than the conservatives generally are. They're more unified, standing by their, whatever groups and pockets they have and not opposing each other. Breaking from the formation for them is a lot more serious. And so two big states, big blue states, California being the other big one that's not in on this yet, are breaking, at least conceding a bit on these policies. They're moving back on them. Now, they're sticking by their beliefs. They're not saying that they no longer believe vaccines are necessary. They're no longer saying they don't think masks are necessary. They're not saying that. They're just saying it's people's own choice in some regards. They're just saying that they can't force it on people. In New York, they're not going to try to force it on all counties. New York City is probably going to be one of the few that actually does get it forced upon them, because de Blasio is still in, and we'll see what the next mayor chooses to do, because he's out soon as well. But folks, this is also tied to something else, I think, which is the 2022 midterm elections. Because all data right now, whether it's redistricting, and remember, Republicans are basically running the redistricting, the federal government right now is trying to actually even step in to stop some of the redistricting. Basically, when they decide House seats, right, House of Representatives, based on districts within states, folks, the Republicans right now are in charge of the redistricting, meaning that they're splitting the states, splitting up these districts in ways that are probably going to get more Republican seats. In addition to that, you had California, New York, a lot of other very blue states already lose seats because people are leaving the states. People are going to, Texas and Florida and so on. Meanwhile, Texas and Florida and other areas are gaining seats because they've gotten more people. Meaning that even if people vote the same, even if nothing changes whatsoever, even if people vote exactly like they did last time around, right? Last time they voted for their local representatives, if it stays exactly the same, Republicans are going to take the House. That's if it doesn't change at all. Because based on redistricting, and again, based also just on the shifts taking place with, I'd say that redistricting, and also I'd say as a shift taking place politically in terms of these movements, where even Latin Americans now are predicting around 44% supporting Biden, about 43% supporting Trump, down from, again, 80% supporting Obama. Really, things are not looking so hot for them. And so they're trying to change up things. Even some Democrat strategists right now are warning that Democrats are probably going to lose the House at least come 2022. And that's if they don't lose the Senate as well, which they also stand a chance to lose. Yeah, so we'll see what happens, folks. If this trend continues, that's going to be another thing as well, because the trend right now is local officials, whether it's governors, whether it's mayors, whether it's even representatives, they're distancing themselves from the policies of Joe Biden. There's even been reports on this in some very far left media outlets. They're distancing themselves from his policies because they're seeing they're not resonating with voters. As I mentioned, even Latin Americans, only about 44%, as opposed to Trump getting 43%, are saying they're going to vote for Biden. And even that could change. 37% and 37% were divided between Republicans and Democrats. Typically, before, the estimate was like 80% would vote Democrat, and not to mention the in-the-middle independents who are undecided still. Based on all this right now, the policies of the Democrats are not resonating with their voters, with their typical, they can always count on them voters. And they're reading the tea leaves, so to speak. They're seeing this and they're saying that we need to change things up. And they're trying to. If they do not change things up, as we now see Colorado and New York doing to an extent, if they don't try to, frankly, force things upon people, force policies people don't want, we'll see if that changes the image of the party they are in, the Democrat Party, which has become the party of mask mandates, which has become the party of lockdowns, which has become the party of forcing vaccines on people, firing medical workers, firing military officials, firing our soldiers and our frontline workers if they don't want to get forcefully vaccinated. And so it's very hard for them, I think, right now to have it through normal means. But as Russell Warner notes, question, Josh, what are the new ways Democrats are trying to fortify the election? It's going to be very hard for them to fortify the election again. Remember, I believe it was New York Magazine. One of the big leftist magazines came out and called it fortifying the election. They're getting called out on that too. Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook, of course, put a whole lot of money into a lot of this. He's getting exposed for a lot of that now. Some of the individuals who fortify the election, they're getting a lot of pushback. The chances of them being able to do what they did in 2020, even based on the fortifying part, will be very difficult. Yeah, Time Magazine. Thank you for clarifying. It'll be very difficult for them to do it again. We will see, though, how it works out. All right, folks, a lot more to talk about. I want to talk about what's happening with the Salvation Army, talking about reading the tea leaves, because the Salvation Army was trying to lecture Christians and lecture white people about wanting to apologize about their whiteness. It was criticizing them on this. There was a lot of pushback. And now it looks like they're going broke. Like the old saying, right? Go woke, or get woke, go broke. The Salvation Army is getting hit with it now. Folks, before we jump into that, first of all, we are still demonetized by YouTube. Luckily, though, we do have sponsors, and tonight's episode is brought to you by American Hartford Gold. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's noticed certain things getting more expensive. With a government that's printing trillions of dollars, inflation is on the incline. If the government continues its money printing and spending, the dollar could lose its coveted role as the world's reserve currency. Saying it for a while now. Frankly, folks, it's kind of on us already. So it's with much appreciation that I introduced today's show's sponsor. That's American Hartford Gold, which is giving some ideas on how to diversify your money, your retirement, and your savings. American Hartford Gold can give you options to diversify with a portion of your portfolio in physical gold and silver. They can also help you move your existing IRA or 401k market into a precious metals IRA, and they make it easy. They're one of the highest rated firms in the country with an A-plus rating from the Better Business Bureau and thousands of satisfied clients. And if you call them right now, they'll give you 1 ounce of free silver for every ounce of gold that you buy. You can call them at 877-260-2764, or you can text Joshua to 65532. Again, that's 877-260-2764, or text Joshua to 65532. And folks, big thanks out to American Hartford Gold for sponsoring tonight's episode. All right, that said, let's talk about the Salvation Army. You might see people dressed as Santa Claus out on the streets, ringing the bell with the red bucket, typically asking for coins, asking for donations. Folks, people are not donating to them like they did before. Not only are people not donating to them, they're also having an issue where people don't even want to volunteer for them. And it seems like this is kind of related to something, because remember what happened late last month, well, a couple weeks ago. Folks, on November 26th, it was reported that the Salvation Army began asking donors to offer a, quote, sincere apology for alleged white supremacy and white-dominated culture. They were asking this of their donors, right? If you're wondering why they're having problems with their donors right now, maybe this has something to do with it. This was taken as a Salvation Army telling people to apologize for so-called whiteness, and was also even invoking Christianity while doing so, telling them they need to repent. Breitbart reported that the Salvation Army's International Social Justice Commission, which they apparently have, crafted a report on this and claimed, quote, many have come to believe that we live in a post-racial society, but racism is very real for our brothers and sisters who are refused jobs and housing, denied basic rights, and brutalized and oppressed because of the color of their skin. And I assume they're not talking about the white people who they're saying need to apologize for this, just generally blanket speaking. It adds that there's, quote, an urgent need for Christians to evaluate racial attitudes and practices in light of our faith and to live faithfully in today's world. So they're criticizing white people. They're getting behind this woke identity that ironically is actually racist in itself when you're denigrating one group of people based on nothing but the color of their skin and saying that you're guilty of some crime based on the color of your skin and nothing else. That's what they're doing. And folks, people got very angry about it. They sent that out to their donors. And then what happens? Suddenly they're seeing that their donors are not donating. Folks, now, this is just the other day, the Salvation Army is possibly seeing the effects of its actions. Fox Seattle reports that the Salvation Army is suddenly facing a shortage in donations and in volunteers. It quotes Colonel Cindy Foley with the NW Salvation Army Division. She said this: the situation is dire, and we are asking our generous supporters in the region to donate to the virtual Northwest Red Kettle, as well as make donations at every physical kettle in whatever way you can. Folks, this is, again, I'd say one of those issues of, the writing in the tea leaves, that you can look at the cause of things, and then you can look at the effect of things. I haven't really seen media tying these together. People were talking about, hey, the Salvation Army was going woke. They rolled some of the stuff back. They tried fixing it. People were very unhappy about it. And we're seeing now that the very people they were sending these to, the very donors they were sending these alerts to, don't seem to be donating suddenly. Now, we can't say for sure that one is connected to the other, but it sure looks like it. And I'd say, folks, as well, this shows that I'd say this shows the possible response among people who might be engaged in things like this, engaged in charity like this, that they seem to not support these kinds of policies to the extent that even if the two are not related directly, in terms of people deciding maybe for another reason that they don't want to donate or volunteer for the Salvation Army, again, within about a 2-week-ish time span between them making that statement and them having financial issues. It could also be, folks, that people are just maybe having trouble financially, don't feel like donating. But frankly, it sure seems like this is the case, because remember, the Salvation Army tried rolling things back. They tried repealing their statements because of the amount of unhappiness among people who would normally support them. This, I think, shows some of the public reaction to things like this. The public does not seem to support actions like this. We're seeing the same thing in school boards across the United States. School boards now are pushing back. Parents are pushing back. Parents don't seem to agree with critical race theory. Parents don't seem to agree with mask mandates or vaccine mandates. They don't seem to agree with the really creepy sex ed that's being taught in schools. They do not seem to agree with this. And so what are people doing? They're trying to silence the parents. And you wouldn't need to silence people, you wouldn't need to censor people, and you wouldn't need to take actions like that if you believed your ideas could win in the normal, I'd say, again, the marketplace of ideas, right? You wouldn't need to silence people if your ideas could win in debate. You wouldn't need to silence people if you could withstand criticism. They're doing it because their ideas cannot withstand criticism. And again, I think this is the writing on the wall on where things are heading. Now, quickly on this as well, there are other ways you can help kids in need. Salvation Army, of course, they donate actually a decent amount of their money does allegedly go to programs and such. I've heard different estimates saying actually very little ends up with the kids. There's different estimates on that. There are better ways to do it if you don't want to support them. There are many other ways. But folks, this also shows something else, which is what happens when usually good institutions become co-opted for divisive social and political agendas. Because again, we're seeing an infiltration of these systems, an infiltration of the nonprofits, an infiltration of the media organizations, things that used to have public trust. But when they become untrustworthy, or they begin, invoking things like what they're calling this, Salvation Army's International Social Justice Commission. Why does the Salvation Army, which is supposed to donate toys and stuff for kids, have a social justice commission internationally when they begin doing things like this and the nature of the nonprofit and the agenda of the nonprofit begins to shift? They can't expect people to stay with them. People are going to stay with them if they continue to support the types of things they're doing. If they do not support the types of things they're doing, they're going to move away from them. And we see people now moving away from them, which again shows that the public, the general public, is not following the agendas being pushed by these different institutions. Now, back to some of these issues, speaking of people not supporting the policies and such, folks, Africa right now is actually showing something very interesting, which is Africa, which, remember, the Omicron variant, people were saying it came from South Africa. And the different medical officials there were saying, why is the world reacting so crazily with the Omicron variant? We keep telling you that, yeah, we have a new variant, but it doesn't seem to be serious. In fact, it seems to be very mild. In fact, as we mentioned in our last episode, the CDC and the WHO, the World Health Organization, did not have data on a single death caused by Omicron. You now have one in the UK. But one death justifying all the tyrannical policies, justifying new lockdowns, justifying high-tech tracking systems, justifying AI and facial recognition systems, justifying using counterterrorism tools on people like in Israel. It's pushing a little far, isn't it? I think they're about 1-1 right now. They're about 1-1 right now with the Baldwins in terms of deaths, right? And so let's talk about what's happening with South Africa and why they think the West is behaving crazy right now. Folks, it says right here that, going over my analysis on it, the chair of the South African Medical Association is saying that the UK government, their harsh response to the Omicron variant, verges on hysteria. They're accusing them of hysteria, right? And they added that the UK government should stay calm, like their old slogan, right? Stay calm or keep calm and carry on. They're telling the UK to stay calm. This comes after the UK Parliament began talking about taking measures to vote on mask mandates, self-isolation, COVID-19 passes, and also rumors of a new lockdown. And folks, medical officials in South Africa were previously criticizing other countries, even before this, including the United States and others, for overreacting on the Omicron variant. One of these individuals, Dr. Angelique Coetzee, chair of the South African Medical Association, one who was criticizing the UK, reiterated that symptoms of Omicron that they've seen are typically mild symptoms with, quote, muscle pain, body aches, a headache, and a bit of fatigue. And they clear up also after about 5 days, they're saying. In other words, you might feel a little uncomfortable. You might have some aches. About 5 days, you should be good. Only one person is known to have died from this. Up until yesterday, the CDC and the WHO did not have a single case of anybody in the world dying from Omicron. It's safer than the flu, basically. And frankly, we never took policies like this with the flu. Briefly, those of you curious as well, the tea tonight is a Taiwanese oolong tea, which is very good. All right, folks. Yeah, Alexandros Werewolf, we said German Santa was arrested. I saw they arrested Santa in Germany. They did arrest Santa because Santa was not wearing a mask. Sorry, kids. All right, folks, on this, let me go a bit deeper into this because there's a few different points of this I want to talk about. Now, I mentioned previously that Epic Times, we actually we spoke directly with the WHO and the CDC to see if they had information on any deaths of the Omicron variant until yesterday, because there was one death yesterday recorded in the UK. They did not have a single death, not one, until yesterday. And this raises the question again of, as South Africa is asking, why the hysteria? Why are people, why are people verging on hysteria over something that you may be sick for 5 days, you might have some muscle pain, some body aches, a headache, and a bit of fatigue? Why is it justifying some of the incredibly harsh policies we're seeing? Folks, Kenya, South Africa, they're behaving more reasonable than pretty much any European country right now. In Kenya, the High Court has suspended a government order for mandatory vaccination, which is being enforced for people wanting to enter national parks, bars, restaurants, and other public areas. They rolled it back. They're not going to be enforcing it. Their court has ruled against it. You don't see this in a lot of other parts of the world, though. South Korea, for example, is taking a course closer to that of Israel, which is introducing new high-tech measures to track and monitor people. Folks, in South Korea, they're implementing a network that takes data from over 10,000 surveillance cameras to monitor COVID-19 cases and to enforce mask mandates. This will work through AI and facial recognition. We'll be able to track if someone was in contact with anyone who was infected with the virus. In other words, they have to monitor everybody close enough where if, someone on the street catches the virus and you happen to pass them by or you're in close contact with them, they'll be able to track you down. They'll be able to find you. You have similar things going on in Australia as well, where people are being thrown in this COVID concentration, a camp to concentrate people who've been in contact with COVID, right? We can call it a COVID concentration camp in Australia, which people have tried to escape from and have been, victims of manhunts and tracked down and thrown back in, although they do say it's voluntary. So, they're just a bit of barbed wire, and they threaten to fine you thousands and thousands of dollars if you step outside the border of your little doorway. But they do say it's voluntary, and they will throw you in that even if you're vaccinated, even if you don't even test positive for the virus, even if you don't have the virus. Most people there do not have it, but they're throwing them in this concentrated camp for this COVID variant. In Israel, too, you see something else. They're implementing a phone tracking system for COVID, which was designed originally as a counterterrorism tool. And they're not looking to begin enforcing, they're now looking to begin enforcing 4 shots if you're going to be considered vaccinated, rather than 2 shots and a booster as a standard for vaccination. Now, it raises some questions, folks. Here in the United States, fully vaccinated as they define it is still 2 shots of Moderna, 2 shots of Pfizer, or 1 shot of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. They're now weighing whether fully vaccinated will be redefined to say you need those and a 3rd shot, a booster. And in Israel, where they already had that and most people were vaccinated and they're finding that the vaccines are not working, they're saying you need 4 shots. And people are questioning, well, can we just jump to the 4th shot? Or do I need to get the first 3 that didn't work before the 4th one works? The first 3 shots don't work. So do I need to get the first 3 shots that don't work to activate the 4th shot? This is an important question to ask in terms of how you should get it. And they're also suggesting that this may just continue. And they're also tying this in some parts of the world, like in Israel, like in South Korea now, nothing like other countries as well. They're tying it directly into these systems to monitor people, these new types of high-tech social control programs, which we'll see if they ever decide to do away with. And here we are, right? Now, folks, again, there's still only 1 known death from the Omicron variant. 1 death being used to justify all of this. 1 death. It's about as dangerous as Alec Baldwin right now. And the data shows it's only a mild illness. There's panic around forced vaccinations and immunity, since the vaccines don't seem as effective with this. They're acknowledging it now. In fact, a new study by researchers with the University of Oxford found a substantial fall in antibodies produced by vaccines against Omicron. Folks, this is the University of Oxford and their own studies on this. They wrote this. They said, quote, "This will likely lead to increased breakthrough infections in previously infected or double vaccinated individuals." Doesn't matter how many vaccines you have, double vaccinated, triple vaccinated. They're now saying you might need 4. And they're saying, quote, "which could drive a further wave of infection." Anyways, folks, we'll see where this goes. Let's jump into some questions now. So if you do have questions, please post them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. First of all, folks, real quick, we do now have a new YouTube channel. Hopefully we can get our monetization back on there. If you're on YouTube, check it out. You can find it on our homepage. It's Crossroads Highlights. We just have highlights there right now. Eventually, we're going to put some of the interviews there, hopefully. And also, we'll be doing some of the lives there we're planning on. We're thinking of how to do it because the show has been demonetized for a long time, and it's nice to make a living off it, to be honest. So we're trying to move things over there, and hopefully we'll get the show unfrozen because this channel, this YouTube seems to have frozen it for a long time now. Again, that's Crossroads Highlights. You can find the link on our homepage or in the description below. Also, folks, tomorrow we're going to have a special live Q&A in addition to the normal ones. This is going to be exclusively on Epic TV or the Epic Times website. And that's going to be one of our special webinars. We're going to have a few different experts coming on talking about the Beijing Olympics and human rights abuses in China. Be sure to tune in for that. It's going to be a special live Q&A, 8 p.m. Eastern time. This is in addition to the other ones, so we're not going to cancel other shows for this. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for the special episode. And folks, also, a lot of you on Epic TV, thanks for being here. Again, we do have our own video platform now, which is Epic TV. If you want to support Crossroads, a great way to do it. Tell a friend or a family member about Epic TV. You can go to epochtv.com/Crossroads. You have a lot of other shows there. Great one over there is Truth Over News. They had a recent episode about the Fauci-funded lab director calling for investigations into a possible virus release from a Wuhan laboratory. What a coincidence. A possible virus release from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, this Wuhan lab, the one that everyone suspects might have had a virus release, a little over a year ago. Folks, let us show you real quick a trailer from that, then we'll jump into questions.
In early February 2020, James Leduc, the prominent Fauci-funded virologist who personally trained staff at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, privately voiced his concerns that the pandemic had originated from the Wuhan lab. As Fauci and his small circle of collaborating scientists were in the process of publicly promoting the natural origin narrative, Leduc was privately asking the vice director of the Wuhan Institute if the COVID pandemic was the result of a release from one of the Wuhan labs. Leduc isn't just another Fauci-funded scientist. He's the director of the Galveston National Lab, one of our nation's most sophisticated biocontainment research facilities. And he's been collaborating with the Wuhan lab since 1986.
All right, folks. Just real quick, some of you are asking for that Oxford study. I posted it in the chat under my name, Joshua Philipp. So if you want the link for that Oxford study, check out the live chat. I posted in there for you. That said, let's jump into some some questions for the night. Again, if you have questions, post them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. Let's see here. Our good friend Seymour Butts. He said, Josh, when the public reacts to things like what the Salvation Army did, doesn't that show the strength of the conservatives here in America? I'd say so, actually. And I've said it a few times, so I won't go too deep into it. But frankly, that was the wave. That was the change happening. And it was a conservative movement, not a Republican movement. Even the Republican Party was changing. If you look back at the Tea Party, which was, shifting politics here in the United States, really represented a return to the original documents, the original, interpretation of the Constitution here in the U.S. Obama derailed the Tea Party. Obama weaponized the IRS to target them, and Obama tried to eliminate them. The Tea Party was mostly destroyed by Obama, weaponizing the IRS. The Tea Party spirit, I would say, not only that, but I'd say the shift away from both the Republican Party and the Democrat Party continued. Remember, Trump represented this. Trump was a part of a phenomena. He was not the embodiment of it. I'd say he was just part of this movement that was already happening in the country. And remember when he came in, the Republicans didn't like him. I mean, he was debating them and he was insulting them on stage, and people were laughing, and it was kind of hilarious. People were watching him, and they were not supporting a lot of the other Republicans. He was insulting a lot of the ones who later turned towards his idea of the new conservative movement. In fact, even after he left office, he's even gone against the Republican establishment party itself. And he's really pushing a new party, which is this MAGA party or Patriot Party or whatever we want to call it. There's been a shift in politics in the US, and this shift was taking place online. It was taking place on YouTube, which is why conservative, not Republican, but conservative influencers were leading the charge in this new movement, which is why the Facebook groups were leading the charge in it, and which is why as well, Facebook, YouTube, the media, and a lot of the political establishment did everything they could to squash that, to prevent these types of discussions from happening. It was this, I think, that phenomena that has made it appear that this movement that began and was in fact very powerful was not as powerful as people thought it was. They did everything they could to eliminate that. But I'd say that movement and that phenomenon is still very much alive. Let's see, just you don't see it because, frankly, the social media censorship, which could turn around actually pretty soon if Trump does, in fact, launch his social media, although we'll see how it goes with that. Another question here. Let's see. This is Go Tell Jesus Saves. He said, what are your thoughts on Taiwan's new vaccine mandates? 24 sectors of essential workers are being forced to vaccinate or lose their jobs or ability to work in their businesses. I do have friends in Taiwan, and they've told me as well that Taiwanese seem to be genuinely very afraid of the virus. If you go to some countries in the world, people, even very conservative countries, sometimes you do find generally people are genuinely really afraid of the virus. Taiwan, people there seem to be genuinely afraid of it. South Korea, is more not pure conservative, more conservative country. People are genuinely afraid of the virus based on people I've talked to there. In a lot of countries, you do find this. It doesn't mean as well that people don't share the same values as a lot of people here in the US, but when you go to certain countries and you look at the media, for example, they don't even have sometimes middle of the road or conservative media. They just have the establishment media. And a lot of the media they have in those countries just use the establishment media, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, basically as the main sources for their articles because they think, oh, that's the standard, that's the US-led stuff. And they don't really differentiate between that and stuff that may not be true. I do know that is shifting to some extent. I have talked to journalists in some other countries, Brazil, for example, Japan, for example, where they've told me that, pretty much that was the standard for a long time, but in the last couple of years, it's begun to shift. And so based on that, if all you're seeing is news telling you that something is a certain way and you have no way of seeing outside those few news outlets telling you things are a certain way, you're going to act based on the information you're exposed to. You're going to use the information you've been exposed to form your ideas of where things are actually at. And if you don't have access to other information, that's what you're limited within. And unfortunately, that is the case for a lot of areas in the world. Another question here from Aaron Marie 241. He said, I have a question. If you're vaccinated and donate blood and a person who is T-vaccinated needs blood, will that jack up the DNA because the DNA is changed from the mRNA vaccine and the recording effect of the mark of the beast? I'm not a scientist. I don't know the data on this. I can tell you I've read articles on the science on this because they have talked about, the blood and stuff like that, and natural immunity. I have read different articles suggesting, again, I'm not a scientist, I've only read articles on it, suggesting that, again, antibody treatment, which they do have, can only be done from people who have not had the vaccines. And so you do need the blood of the unvaccinated if you're going to have the antibody treatment for even people who are vaccinated. Somehow it messes things up if you get the vaccine when it comes to that type of treatment, based on what I've read. Another question here from Shannon. And yeah, and those of you who haven't gotten the vaccine, your blood's going to be very valuable very soon, probably. Maybe you can auction it, It reminds me of that movie. I keep playing it in my mind. You ever see Doctor Strangelove or How I Learned to Love the Bomb, where you have this general and he goes crazy and he launches a nuclear war and he has this whole conspiracy theory about how the Soviets are trying to, take away the purity of our precious bodily fluids. Seems we're there, folks. That general had it right. They're after your precious bodily fluids, apparently. All right, another question from Shannon Haney. A great movie too, if you want to watch something funny. Question from Shannon Haney. You said, question, do you believe Julian Assange will be extradited to the U.S.? If so, will he get a fair trial? It's hard to say. I do think that Julian Assange will be extradited to the U.S. It was interesting to see that Trump himself did not even pardon Julian Assange. When Trump was leaving office, a lot of people were watching and waiting and wondering whether Trump was going to pardon him. He did not in the end. The reasons why, your guess is as good as mine, based on my analysis on why Trump did not pardon him, is because remember the Trump-Russia hoax, which it was proven as a hoax. A lot of that was based on these leaked emails that Julian Assange was publishing through WikiLeaks, emails which were of course part of the Hillary Clinton server. These different organizations were claiming that her server was hacked by the Russians and then provided to Julian Assange and so on. Assange could have ended the whole debate. Assange could have basically done away with the whole conspiracy theory by just revealing who provided him with that information. Julian Assange to this day has never done that. Of course, he is a journalist and he's entitled to protect his sources. Why he chose to not reveal that, again, to even protect the president of the United States, was again maybe because of his own, maybe he has personal reasons, maybe he was just standing by his principles as a journalist, and he is a journalist, that he did not want to reveal that. There were different theories, some of which were very credible, and the data demonstrating that it looked like the information, well, there was demonstratable evidence that there was no breach of the Hillary Clinton servers. They were never provided to the FBI for analysis. They never actually went through the process of verifying whether it was an external hack or a breach, or whether someone downloaded them directly or something like that. The evidence based on the data that we were able to get does suggest it was an insider thing, meaning somebody very likely stole that information directly, which raised some questions on whether maybe someone who was working for the Democrat campaigns may have stolen this data and then passed it to Julian Assange. We never got information on this. There were several beliefs on this. Seth Rich, for example, who was killed by two gang members, I believe part of MS-13, who were later killed also, apparently. It's unclear what exactly happened because it was never fully clarified to the public. Julian Assange would be one of the only people who could clarify that to the public. He never did. Now, Trump had the chance to pardon Assange. He did not. And Assange now is facing extradition to the United States, where he's going to face trial. Assange was not on the good side of Obama. Assange was not on the good side of a lot of these politicians. If, in fact, Assange had information on Hillary's server, he's probably not on the good side of them either. Meaning that if he comes here and he did things to hurt the Obama administration, to hurt Hillary Clinton, and maybe had information that he ended up not releasing that incriminated Trump, he's not on the good side of many people. We will see how his trial is held when he comes here and whether he will get a fair trial. I would say that he's far enough removed now from American politics and controversies where he might be able to. And I don't think people will have too many notions when testifying or going in there. But we'll see. At the very least, we might be interested in seeing what kind of evidence comes out during the trial, whether we are shown evidence of where the information came from, what his sources may have been, because it's going to be interesting to watch. And again, he had a lot of very sensitive information. WikiLeaks was, of course, an organization that encouraged people to, steal or get government documents and then release it through him. Yeah, Tower and Starry said Yuri B, referring to Yuri Bezmenov. His interviews connect so many dots. Yeah, actually, folks, if you have not watched the YouTube interviews of Yuri Bezmenov, I can't recommend them enough. Notably, as well, a lot of people talk about Yuri Bezmenov's videos. He was a Soviet defector. He was a Soviet propagandist who defected to the West. He lived in Canada and he revealed a lot of information on how Soviet disinformation and ideological subversion campaigns worked. Most notably, he talked about the process of ideological subversion and the underhanded means being used to target the United States. Things we can see unfolding in very wild ways right now, which is why so many people right now are watching it. Lesser known about Yuri Bezmenov is he actually has a book, at least one that I know of. If you can find a print copy of it, you're doing better than I can, because I've been trying to find a print copy for a long time and I cannot find a print copy. His book was called Love Letter to America, and he wrote it under his pseudonym because he was on the run from the Soviets. His pseudonym was Thomas Schulman. If you haven't read his book, I highly, highly recommend it. It's actually not thick. I believe it's like 50 pages, and you can find PDFs of this online. All right, folks, let's go over a couple more questions, then we'll jump into some more stories. This is from Larison. You said, Josh, do you have any merchandise for Crossroads, like t-shirts or mugs, to help with donations for your channel? So I can tell you, we actually did print out some stickers and bumper stickers and stuff, just as kind of a test run to get things rolling. Unfortunately, when we got we were going to make t-shirts, we were going to make this stuff, we were working on it. When we got demonetized, it shut off the system. So basically, Facebook has a system tied to it where you can use these services and you can print t-shirts and stuff like that, and it's not a whole lot of work because they take care of those things for you, like shipping and stuff. When they demonetized us, they took that from us. We'll see if we can. Again, we have this new channel, Crossroads Highlights, as we begin hopefully migrating things over to that channel, which will help us get away from the censorship here. We're still going to keep this channel updated, but try to migrate things over to the new one. Once we do that, we should be able to get merchandise out, and so that would be nice. My mom would love a Crossroads shirt, I'm sure, as well. And again, we had actually started making these, but we got derailed when we got demonetized. Gail Cruz, he said, question, where's Durham? Well, Durham's showing signs. John Durham, the special counsel who was appointed when Trump was still president to investigate the Trump-Russia collusion scandal, also called Spygate or Crossfire Hurricane, which has turned from the Trump-Russia scandal into the investigation on how Democrat officials, different political activists, even foreign spies like Christopher Steele and Russian agents worked together to basically defraud the United States and the American people, working together with the Clinton campaign, the Democratic Party, to defraud the American people by creating this scandal under this idea that Trump was colluding with the Russians. It was a disinformation campaign under the guise, ironically, used to fight the very narrative of disinformation, lying about these things while hiding their lie by accusing others of what they themselves were doing, which was ironically colluding with Russia to create a disinformation campaign meant to undermine the elections and undermine the president of the United States, Trump at that time. It does seem now that Durham is moving forward with some of these prosecutions or recommending prosecutions, and in doing so has also revealed a lot of information. That suggests he's planning on possibly pressing charges against a lot of other people tied to what appears to be, and what is verifiably in many regards, a conspiracy, a very large conspiracy involving a lot of people. Lisa Bell, you said Josh is half Filipino. I'm actually a quarter. I'm mixed. My dad's mom is Filipino and Hawaiian, and my other family, my mom's mom, you can trace her family back, actually came across on the Mayflower, and then other ancestors, mostly white, different countries. Just Lisa Bell, you're asking about my nationality. Yeah, I have family who did a lot of the genealogy stuff, so I have a lot of the documents on it. All right, folks, let's jump into some more stories for the night, because I want to talk about what's happening with, something we've talked about before, which is how a lot of officials are making a whole lot of money off of the very policies they're using to strip away your rights, to strip away your freedoms. We talked about how a lot of them are investing in things, right? They're investing in things that are making them a whole lot of money alongside the very policies they're voting for to strip away your rights and to use your own tax dollars against you in many regards to do that. Let's talk about it. Now, folks, while politicians are forcing people right now to get COVID-19 vaccinations and are directing taxpayer money for it, at least 75 lawmakers in the United States have found a way to turn the pandemic and mandates into personal financial profit. They're making money off the very things they're doing. Business Insider reports that dozens of lawmakers, both Republican and Democrat notably, have invested in companies that have a direct stake in the pandemic policies, including with shareholdings in vaccine manufacturers making the shots for COVID-19. And folks, this raises some serious ethical questions, since members of Congress, the same ones who are making money off of this, some of them, voted on relief bills in 2020 and 2021 that had a combined value of close to $6 trillion. Some of that money going to the very things they were invested in, meaning that they were going to personally profit by doing so. They also authorized more than $10 billion with a B to help drug companies distribute the shots, which again was something they were directly invested in, which was directing taxpayer money to things that will personally profit them. Now, while insider trading is illegal for most people, like Martha Stewart, for example, it's generally legal among members of Congress. They can get away with it because they passed laws that allow them to do it. They made laws that allow them to break the law, essentially. Just one of the negative sides of the way law can be manipulated. Now, folks, there are some exceptions to that, though, which a lot of people aren't aware of. They're still held to some standards under what was called the Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act of 2012. But there's some stipulations to that as well. There was another Business Insider story that found that 49 members of Congress have violated that law. Again, the Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act of 2012. Although for them, even, again, they're allowed to have insider trading, they're allowed to do these things. There are some stipulations on it, but if they violate those stipulations, you know what the penalty is for them? It's not prison. It's not community service. It's a fine of around $200. And if you wonder why people who are not making that much, they make decent pay in Congress, but if you're wondering why so many of them are like multi-millionaires, are making a whole lot of money far beyond the means which they get through the normal income, you can look at some of their investments. Now, this raises some other ethical issues as well. If some members of Congress are directing trillions with a T, right? Again, trillions, we're talking about $6 trillion almost that they directed just for this virus and relief packages, most of which went to no things that were even connected to the virus. If they were directing money to a pandemic that they're directly profiting from, they're making money off of this, then it creates financial interest to keep the crisis going, regardless of data, which is, of course, going to make people raise questions over what is the basis of these policies that do not seem to be justified by data or science, do not seem to be justified by the information coming out that, again, one death documented under the Omicron variant that they're making these policies for, that do not seem to justify the harsh lockdowns, the monitoring programs, and other things. What is the reason? Well, if they're making money off it, if they're personally profiting from it, and if continuing it is something that benefits them financially, at the very least, it raises some conflict of interest issues, which people might want to pay attention to. And meanwhile, agencies also appear to be restricting access to alternative treatments for COVID-19. One example of this, There were recent accusations that the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, is working with the post office to hold packages that contain ivermectin. Now, it's unclear whether this is happening on a large scale. There were some tweets about it going around. I did manage to get the document on this based on some of the tweets. There was some with it. Folks, an FDA document on one of these seizures of an ivermectin shipment states that the 200 ivermectin tablets that were, quote, not in compliance, they say they were not in compliance with the requirements of the law, since the bottle, they say, has been determined to lack adequate directions for use. Now, it's unclear whether, again, whether the FDA is intercepting packages of shipments of ivermectin based on that, whether this was one package that in fact did not have adequate directions for use, or whether they're doing this blanket across the board for any shipments they can find of it. But this is one case that does raise some red flags. But just painting this picture a bit broader, there was another recent case. A doctor in Mississippi said that he was fired from his job after he tried treating patients with ivermectin, a drug that is notably FDA approved to treat parasites and has other uses medically, but that is less profitable to pharmaceutical companies. You know why? Because its patent has expired. They don't make money off it. They can't profit from it. It's cheap. You can buy it for like 2 cents a tablet or something like that. In fact, I know people, because I'm from San Diego originally, I know people who just drive down to Mexico to get it. People do that because it's cheap. It's easy to get in most countries. And frankly, in some countries like India, where the government programs for treating COVID-19 included packages that contained ivermectin, that was part of the normal protocol for treating it. And guess what? They didn't have that series of outbreaks there, surprisingly, because you have dense population. You have, in some areas, poor hygiene and so on by most standards, which makes it very hard to contain something under normal circumstances like a pandemic. They did really well with it. They didn't have the issues a lot of countries did, and they didn't have to institute the incredibly tight restrictions that many countries had to. Shane O'Brien is saying Japan did the same thing. Yeah, I know a lot of countries did the same thing. In Mexico, this is like an over-the-counter drug. It's easy to get. It's cheap. But folks, they can't make a profit off it, which again raises the questions, and we can only suggest so much in terms of the reasoning for it, which raises the question again of how much personal profit has to do with this. And this again ties to the issue that people are beginning to doubt the integrity of the people making these policies when they are personally profiting from them, and when it is in their personal vested financial interest to restrict other treatments that they cannot make a profit on. Whether this is in fact the motivation, we can't say. But we can say there's a conflict of interest that is causing public doubt. Now, meanwhile, something I wanted to show you all because I thought it was funny. Do you all remember when it was called a conspiracy to suggest that the government might enforce vaccinations? Let me show you something. Folks, this is a Vice article from February 28th, 2020. Just illustrating something interesting, which is the way narratives change. And frankly, a great example of the way things have gone with this pandemic. Because information that is in fact accurate tends to be called conspiracy when it first emerges, such as a documentary that you all might have seen on this channel over a year and a half ago, where frankly we talked about almost everything that's happening now in terms of information on where this virus may have come from in Wuhan, China, which you can still find on this channel, by the way. It was called Investigating the Origins of the Wuhan Coronavirus. But folks, let me show you this article real quick because it's good to have a bit of retrospect sometimes. Now, this Vice article states that the idea that some people held a, quote, terrified certainty that someday the government will find a convenient excuse to enforce Orwellian degrees of control. It says this is a, quote, common theme in the anti-vax world and conspiracy theorist communities more broadly, that every disease outbreak is a pretext to enforce a secret, frequently sinister agenda. Yeah. Can we scroll up just to show the headline here because it's funny? Yeah, scroll up to the top. Yeah. Anti-vaxxers are terrified the government will enforce a vaccine for coronavirus. Those anti-vaxxer conspiracy theorists, folks, as we know, the government would never enforce a vaccine for coronavirus. Anybody who believes that might happen is obviously a conspiracy theorist. Terrified certainty that someday the government will find a convenient excuse to enforce Orwellian degrees of control, as they define it. Folks, that was Vice on February 28th, 2020, saying that this was wild conspiracy theory. Now, as ridiculous as this stuff is, because they do this, they accuse people of things that they call conspiracy, they form labels on it, they attack people with it, they even get people demonetized and deplatformed with things like this. Remember my own show, the one you're watching right now, we got hit hard on Facebook. We got censored, all kinds of stuff for the documentary we did over a year ago, almost all of which has been shown to be true by now, but they called it conspiracy back then because it took them a while to verify everything that we said in it, frankly. But folks, this shows how these fact checks work, that these fact checks themselves are oftentimes not true. In fact, there was just an article where in a court hearing, Facebook was forced to acknowledge that its fact checks are opinion because they're being held to this. These organizations that claim to be fact checkers, that claim to have authority to determine what is true and what is false, they make mistakes. And not only that, as Facebook has acknowledged, sometimes their opinion. And sometimes these are closed-minded individuals who just choose to not believe things regardless of information. Perfect example is this story and what's happening at Facebook. But also this shows something else, which is how the conspiracy label is used. Media suggested these mandates as possibilities. The mandates are pushing now. If you were a media organization and you suggested that the government may enforce vaccine mandates, you would have been called a conspiracy theory. In fact, you were called a conspiracy theory. As you can see here in this Vice article, you would have been called that. And the problem is when these organizations, these news organizations work hand in hand with fact checkers, work hand in hand with social networks, work hand in hand with Wikipedia and other websites and even some nonprofits, they use these types of articles to go and rally them to censor their own business competitors. There's a business behind this fact checking. There's a business behind lying to you, like this article right here. There's a business behind it, a financial interest behind it, and a political motive behind it. And frankly, they use this not only to censor journalists like myself, but also censor you. How many of you posted things on Facebook or Twitter or elsewhere that you believe got censored? How many of you got alerts from Facebook or YouTube or Twitter or wherever else that sent you alerts telling you that you shared misinformation or disinformation? This type of ideological control, this type of regulation of speech, and this creation of bodies that are given some kind of weird powers that are not official to determine what is true and what is false, while themselves often making mistakes and lying to people by doing this, frankly, have themselves created, ironically, misinformation and disinformation. All right, folks, that said, it's getting late, so we'll call it a night. Always a lot more to talk about than we could get into. Some big stuff in the works on this show. I'll keep you all updated soon. I've been thinking about how to take this show to the next level. Again, now we have a new YouTube channel that's Crossroads Highlights. That's going to help us break out of this censorship bubble. So, folks, please go to Crossroads Highlights. Please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Eventually, we're going to try to move some of our show over to the new channel. We also have Epic TV, and those of you in Epic TV, thanks for supporting us. Thanks for being here. Hope you also enjoy the other programs we have there. That said, folks, always a lot of negative stuff and always a lot of craziness going on, but there's some good stuff in the world. I mentioned, of course, one of the shows we have on Epic TV is Shen Yun Creations. And those of you not familiar with Shen Yun, it's a New York-based performing arts company. They were trying to restore classical Chinese dance and a lot of the underlying values of traditional Chinese culture. and they're not allowed to perform in China because the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, does not like them. The CCP calls up the different theaters as they try to tour in the US, in the United States, and tries to get the theaters to cancel the show because the CCP is afraid of a dance company. The CCP is afraid of a performing arts company that's doing classical music and classical Chinese dance. And why are they afraid of it? Because they're restoring the culture the Communist Party of China has tried to destroy. Folks, beautiful stuff. Be sure to check it out. They're touring in the U.S. again. I know some of you have mentioned that the theaters are having either vaccine or testing mandates. Unfortunately, that's the theaters, and they can't really get around it. But it is worth watching if you want to get like a virus test to go see it. I can tell you it's very much worth it. I've seen it more times than I can count. Beautiful show, wonderful stuff. I'll show you a trailer at the end of this video of Shen Yun Creations over in Epic TV. So if you can't make the show, check out Shen Yun Creations at Epic TV. That said, folks, as always, appreciate all of you. Be sure to join our special additional live Q&A this week, which is going to be tomorrow on Epic Times and Epic TV. That's going to be at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. So be sure to tune in. Special additional live Q&A tomorrow, 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. That said, folks, as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.